think I've probably mentioned this before, but the first known depiction of Jesus Christ was in a graffito on the wall of a house near the Palatine Hill in Rome. It was scratched into plaster, and it depicts a young man worshiping. And he is worshiping a man with the head of a donkey who is hanging from a cross. And it's written beneath this picture, it says, Alexandros worshiping his God. So the first representation of Christ is to ridicule Christ and those who believe in him. The pagans of Rome found this Christian belief, this cult of people following this Jesus guy, to be as absurd as we find today's conspiracy theories. So Alexandros was an object of ridicule. And Christ on the cross was an unlikely king, and even more unlikely God. 100 years, though, 100 years after that graffiti was scratched into that wall, Christianity was the official religion of the Roman Empire. And it's gone downhill ever since. That marked the time when people started joining the church because it was the thing to do. You wanted to get ahead, you joined the church. Yet still today, we celebrate Reign of Christ Sunday. Unlikely as it may have seemed, we know that Christ rules in our hearts and through all creation. When Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the King of the Jews?" I think there must have been a note of bemused incredulity when he said that. A man like you, a king? Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world." Now David was a great king of this world. Also an unlikely king. He got his start as a shepherd. An unlikely career curve. And for the most part, he was a just king, a flawed man, but one who was loved by God. And so David could say, "The Spirit of the Lord speaks through me. His word is upon my tongue." And the psalm we read responds to that. "Let your faithful shout for joy. For your servant David's sake, do not turn away the face of your anointed one." David was the one who rules over people justly. And he did this because he ruled in reverent awe of God. David was like the light of morning, like the sun rising on a cloudless morning, gleaming from the rain on the grassy land. Isn't that a beautiful image? Can't you just imagine yourself walking upon that scene? Having you had moments like that when you felt your heart lifted, as though you would have had a glimpse into the sacred? When I read this, my mind goes, well, it went right back to back in the 70s. One of my first trips out to photograph the desert when I was working for New Mexico Magazine. And I'm camped in this remote little canyon. And that night the wind just howls down that canyon, destroys my tent. And I'm sitting there very early in the morning, it's still pitch black, huddled up trying to keep warm, drinking a hot cup of coffee, waiting for the light. And when the light appeared, first it was on the rim of the canyon. The light would pick out the rocks along the rim, and then shortly after that, all the little wildflowers for its spring would glow like little flames. Moments like this give us glimpses of the sacred. And I read this passage about David, and I think, if we ever had a ruler who, like David, listened to God and spoke the words that God gave him, that would be such an uplifting moment. These moments that we have, the times that we have when we glimpse the sacred, they call us to pay attention, to be aware of all the possibilities that God has for our life. And since this passage compares just and unjust rulers, such moments also call us to know that most of what the world offers us is godless. And the godless are like thorns, prickly, they're snare. And they are consumed by the fire of their misery and fear. Remember last week I said, don't allow the cruel, the heartless, the godless to provoke you to fear or anger or any other destructive emotion. Instead, do all you can to provoke others to love and good deeds. Whatever the maelstroms of this world, it is God who will bring you home to safety. We may feel adrift, but God is the deep and powerful current that will bring us home. Remember Nightbird I spoke of her a few weeks ago? This singer who is suffering terribly from cancer. She asked for a miracle. She wanted to be released from all her pain. And she says joyfully, I didn't get that one. I got another miracle instead. God will bring us home. There is always, in the end, joy. God offers us joy. But we have to be there. We have to sit in the dark, make the coffee, wait for the light. And that's what Advent is about. Next week, we're going to be awaiting God, waiting upon Him, knowing that the possibility that God will enter our lives and guide our lives, that possibility is always there. We only have to be there, to show up. And when we show up, just be there expecting God to give us something wonderful. Because Christmas is not just about the celebration of the birth of Jesus. It's about the arrival of an unlikely king. Psalm 132 speaks of the one to arise from the house of David. I have prepared a lamp for my anointed one. His enemies I will clothe with disgrace, but on him his crown will gleam. As it happened, the king arrived in humble circumstances. as had David. But Jesus was not to be a great worldly king after the fashion of David. His kingship is of our hearts, in a way mysterious to us. He's both in our hearts, and he is also God. And he has always been with God, in whom there is no time, no history. The book of Revelation is a vision, indeed a series of visions of Christ, who is and who was and who is to come. It goes on to tell us that Jesus, this unlikely king, was God in flesh. This Jesus, the faithful witness, the firstborn of the dead, and the ruler of the kings of the earth. Now, the word witness in this context can also be translated martyr. And the fact that the phrase, the firstborn of the dead, is used suggests that the writer is saying to his readers who were living in a world where Christians were likely to be persecuted, he is saying, you may have to accept martyrdom if you were to follow Jesus. But Jesus also accepted martyrdom. That's what it involved to be, for him, to be a faithful witness of God. The author's revelation is of the return of Christ. Look, he is coming with the clouds. Every eye will see him. God speaks, as he did at the baptism of Jesus. And this time, he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, who is and who was and is and who is to come, the Almighty. The great affirmation of this book is that Jesus, the unlikeliest of kings, is in fact God incarnate, the Alpha and the Omega, the one who is at the beginning and end of all things. Every eye will see him, even the unbelieving eye, the godless eye, the thorns in the garden, will all see him. That every eye should see Jesus, does that surprise us? After all, it happens every day. Every time you have one of those little moments that show you the sacred, but more often, the moments that pass you by because you weren't paying attention. Jesus Christ is working in our lives every moment, whether we see it or not. Could it be that even the believing eye does not see the work of God? Rhonda once visited a friend of ours, and a friend keeps a very clean house. That may be why Rhonda doesn't visit all that often. And Rhonda noticed this beautiful Native American mask that was on the wall. And she said something about how beautiful it was. And her friend, not even looking at the mask, replied, oh yeah, sure it is. Yeah, it's nice, yeah. Very offhand way. And Rhonda said, but you aren't even looking at it. And her friend says, well, I see it all the time. I dust that thing once a week. And Rhonda said, and all you see is the dust. And her friend just stopped in her tracks and thought for a moment and said, you're right. You see, could it be that sometimes we miss the beauty because we only see the dust. We're so busy dusting and tidying and making life all straight and proper that we don't see the astonishing complexity of beauty that is all around us. Are we too busy to see God in the everyday? Look around you. Is this a world where everybody is looking for the God who reigns over us? Are we in a world full of people who recognize his work whenever it happens? He gives us grace and peace if we will accept it. Everything comes back to this, the love of God. In the Gospel of John, I read, "Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' It seemed unlikely to Pilate. He knew what kings looked like. He must himself have been the very image of wealth and position. He was, after all, a Roman governor in the employ of Emperor Tiberius, who Pliny the Elder called the gloomiest of all men. Pilate's not one of the obstreperous rabble, these Jews that are always making trouble, disturbing the Pax Romana. Pilate is businesslike. Pilate is the kind of guy you'd love to have join Rotary. He must have looked at Jesus and thought, this is success, this is glory, this is kingship. Pilate cannot recognize Jesus for the king he is. Because like millions of people ever since, he is going by appearances. Jesus says, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." But Pilate can't understand the answer when he hears it, nor can he understand the attitude. It's not from here. Pilate's saying, what do you mean? And Jesus says, "You say that I am a king. For this was I born. For this I came into the world." Now notice, he's not referring to being a king. That's not why he came into the world. He says, "For this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." And that truth is available to every one of us. All we have to do is to be open to it. We have to wake up, make the coffee, wait for the light, and the light will arrive. Jesus is the faithful witness, the soon-to-be martyred faithful witness to the love of God. There is no way that Pilate, or any man in his position, with his responsibilities, his enemies, his allegiances, can understand Christ. Or so it would seem. I mean, miracles happen. There is an ancient tradition that Pilate, or perhaps it was only Pilate's wife, converted to Christianity. It seems unlikely, but with God all things are possible. To whom do you bow down? Which God do you serve? And how will you enter into this season of Advent? How will you await the peace and love that arrived among us in the form of an unlikely king? Christ be praised. Amen.